Welcome to the PARCC Fall Preview for Teachers. This is actually the second series that we're doing for educators over this week and next week. We really appreciate you joining us today, probably after a long day at school already. My name is Callie Riley. I'm the Associate Director for State Engagement at PARCC. Today we are pleased to have with us Dr. Phyllis Lynch, Director, Office of Instruction, Assessment, and Curriculum for the Rhode Island Department of Education, and Audra McPhillips, Mathematics Specialist PreK-12 for West Warwick Public Schools in Rhode Island. While both of our presenters today happen to be from Rhode Island, I want to mention that the webinar is geared towards all of the PARCC states. So keep that in mind as you're thinking through questions that you want to ask at the end of the webinar. Phyllis will open this up with doing a brief recap of the first year of the PARCC assessment. Some of the information she will cover may be very familiar to you. She will go through it quickly, but there will be plenty of time at the end for questions if there's anything that you would like to come back to. Then she'll hand it over to Audra, who will walk you through some mock score reports and talk about how she plans to communicate about the reports to parents. And then I will actually bring us back to some new resources for educators and parents. And with that, I would like to turn the floor over to Phyllis to get us started. Phyllis?
Great. Thank you, Callie. Well, welcome, everyone. I'm so glad that there's so many teachers on the phone today from all across the PARCC states. And I'm excited to talk to you today about PARCC and so you can learn about the PARCC reports. So I want to just start with an overview. I don't think much of this information will be new to you. As you know, the PARCC assessments have multiple priorities and purposes. Most importantly, it was developed to be a high-quality assessment in English language arts, literacy, and mathematics based on the Common Core standards in grades 3 through 11. And our high school assessments were developed as end-of-course assessments, which I think is a real asset to our high schools. As its name states, PARCC will also report whether students are ready or on track for college and careers. As you know, too many of our students are graduating from high school and even accepted to college, but fail to pass college placement tests and have to spend much of their first year taking remedial courses, which has added expenses for them. We also know that assessments need to provide teachers, students, and parents with actionable data to improve teaching and learning. And these assessments will give you that information. And actually, Audra's going to be talking to you a little bit about what that data will be. In addition, it needs to be valid and reliable to use for a range of accountability purposes, right, including school and district, as well as educator and student accountability. When our governors signed on to PARCC, they did so because we wanted data for our states that they could compare with other states in order to advocate for increased educational funding. Also, so districts across states with similar demographics could share best practices. And I think this has been a real opportunity for all the PARCC states and even across Common Core states. So I think it's important to remember that PARCC test questions include computer interaction, right, and multimedia to be more engaging to students. We anticipate that using technology will reduce scoring costs and we'll be able to get scores back to all of you more quickly. We know that this year was a delay because of performance level setting, which we'll talk about, but in the future we'll be getting scores back much faster. So, test administration 2015. It was a long road to get there, right? But we got a lot accomplished. I know there was a lot of anxiety around the technology, but we successfully tested 5 million students across the 12 states with maybe not perfect, but certainly very successful, with about 1.2 million students testing in a day. So this was a real accomplishment for testing and to have successful with very little glitches as we went through. So all of this represents an enormous accomplishment. And I think the biggest part of this accomplishment is the thousands of hours contributed by educators across the PARCC states to help develop the test. Because it is really important that educators, not only state educators who work for state departments, but educators in the classroom are part of building this test to make sure that it really reflects what we want our students to know and be able to do. That being said, our 2015 administration, as you all know, was not as we all wanted it to be. And so we listened to the feedback from the first year, and the governing board voted to make some changes. So I want to be clear that these changes don't result in any performance tasks in ELA or mathematics, reducing that rigor. So we still maintain all of our ELA and literacy performance tasks. We still maintain rigorous items. We're asking kids to think deeply. And that was important because, as you all know, in order to get at some of the depths of the Common Core standards, we need those kinds of tasks and questions in there. So there was overall about a 90-minute per grade reduction. The other piece that was, I think, will be a big relief to schools and districts is the consolidation into one testing window. So not only are we reducing from 2 20-day windows to 1 30, what that also does is reduce the administrative burden on our educators. We all know that that was a lot of work to upload files and to manage 2 testing windows, let alone the window itself. So this will be an added relief onto folks as they administer it in only one window. And that single new window will again end at the 90-minute mark of the school year for our schools. And in addition to the overall testing time reduction and one window, there are also fewer units, so which will likely result in less days of testing depending on how schools and districts break them up. So as you can see here, that there was a reduction in many of them in order to allow for less disruption to the instructional day. So the redesigned ELA tests are composed of 3 units, and the math tests are composed of 3 or 4 units. And these changes mean greater uniformity among the test unit times. So they are now similar to actual class times, which means the testing schedule is disrupted less of the instructional time. So here we are. It's right as we get ready for our first results from the PARCC assessments. And just a little overview of how we got there. So in spring 2015, we administered our first PARCC assessments. In July and August this year, we conducted performance level setting, and I will talk to you about that in a minute. August and September, that's when all of our commissioners of all the PARCC states came together to approve the cut scores, which are the scores for each performance level. And fall 2015, we will be getting out those score reports. So what is performance level setting? This summer, educators, both K-12 and post-secondary faculty, came together to determine the score that each student must earn on each of the PARCC assessments in order to achieve a particular performance level. And states nominated educators from throughout their states to participate in these panels who look at items and look at our performance levels and determine what is good enough. Based on their work, recommendations went to the PARCC Governing Board for approval. And hundreds of educators from all the PARCC states participated in this process. So that resulted in our 5 performance levels. As you can see here, from level 1, did not yet meet expectations, to level 5 exceeded expectations. And levels 4 and 5 are considered to be on track for college and career ready at the high school level. And a college and career ready determination in that ultimate high school class, so that'd be Algebra 2, Integrated Math 3, and ELA 11, means at participating colleges and universities that students can enter their freshman year without having to take remedial courses. And that is really important as it goes back to one of our original goals of the PARCC assessments. So finally, here's our timeline. And so we should be seeing score reports arriving in districts starting in November through December. And districts will certainly be working to get them out to parents and families in a timely manner. So now I'm going to hand it over to Audra, who's going to talk to you about the score reports.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Audra McPhillips. I'm a teacher and a math coach in a small school district in Rhode Island. And I am going to take you through a look at a couple of sample score reports. These are the types of reports that parents and families will receive on this 2014-2015 assessment. There's a link here on this slide, and this is a spot where you can find the sample score reports on the PARCC site. On the next slide, you see here a grade 6 sample report for ELA, the literacy piece. All of the PARCC states, with the exception of DC, will use this very report. And on the next few slides, we're going to kind of zoom in to different parts of the report and talk not only about how to read it, but I'm also going to share just some information about how they came about and also how I'm going to use them to have conversations with parents in my district. So here is a sort of a zoom in where you can see the student performance level. Student performance on PARCC assessments is described on this individual student report using both scale scores and performance levels. So the scale score, or the overall score here, is a level 3. Which Phyllis mentioned means the student is approaching expectations. And that's a numerical value that will sort of summarize the overall level of performance attained by that student. If you take a look at the graphical representation of overall performance with the orange and yellow and green, you can see this. It's kind of a clear illustration of the 5 levels and where that student falls. I want to mention that the range of scores that are indicated at the top of the graphic came out of that work that Phyllis mentioned earlier around the performance level setting. I was one of those educators that spent a week of my summer in Denver doing this work, and I want to let you know that I was there with hundreds of teachers from all across the country, and we worked really long days through a really intense and rigorous process with psychometricians who kind of taught us a valid way to look at this information, and we examined items and compared them to those performance level descriptors, and through several rounds of calibration and discussion, we're able to come up with those numbers that you see there, those numbers that if a student were to score this number, they bump up into that next level. And I found it to be a powerful process. I can tell you, as someone who works in classrooms every day, that the numbers we came up with are really fair and appropriate, and I think representative of the students that you would picture entering each of those levels. So I just wanted to communicate that because I think it's so important to know that those numbers didn't kind of come out of the sky. I also want you to notice that underneath that colorful graphic, there's also this neat chart of school average, district average, state average, and PARCC average. So a parent and a teacher will be able to see where that student falls with respect to kind of the other averages that have emerged from this test. And then finally, just below, because this is an ELA report, you can actually see more details regarding the reading portion of the test and the writing portion of the test. I think this next part of the score report, which ends up towards the bottom for me as a teacher, is really the most useful. We have these little graphics, I guess, that are going to help you see how a student performed in each specific skill set. We call this subclaim performance. The down arrow means the student is below expectation. So that means in this particular subset, this particular subclaim, the student didn't perform as well as students who met expectations. The left and right arrow means that student nearly meets expectations. So in this particular case, as this educator, I would know, okay, literary text is a huge issue for the student. We've really got to focus there. Informational text, they've got some good stuff going on, but there's obviously some gaps that we need to fill. And then finally, the up arrow means meets or exceeds expectations. So for this particular student, conventions is a real strong suit, and this is a place where we can kind of build for this student. So those graphics will kind of help you to determine where areas of strength and areas for improvement are. Here you can see a sample Algebra 2 report, same setup, and you can see that this student's overall score is a level 5, and that means that the student has exceeded expectations. And you can see they're kind of right in the middle, in the lower end of that level 5. Again, we have that same subclaim set up for math. And when I look at this as a math teacher, I notice some things that don't particularly surprise me. This particular student, and obviously is a strong student, really exceeded in terms of major content, reasoning, and modeling. The one place where they have some gaps is additional and supporting content, and I'm going to guess that a lot of you that are out there as we've transitioned to the Common Core, you've probably done what I've done and spent a lot of time on major content because it's been a big shift, and that's the place where you know students really need to focus and maybe haven't touched on additional and supporting as much. So if I got this score report, it wouldn't surprise me. It would kind of be in line with the work that I've been doing with students. I anticipate my own students that I work with that I might see some nearly meeting or below in the areas of reasoning and modeling as well, only because those are a huge shift from the previous state standards. And I know just from looking at PARCC released items online that those tend to be, areas where, we're expecting students to do a lot of application and show a lot of conceptual understanding. So, this information would be incredibly helpful to me in terms of how to change my instruction as a whole or how to target individual needs in my room. This shows the backside of the report, which gives general information to parents about things like how do you start a discussion with your child's teacher about these scores. It describes each performance level in depth, and it answers some, anticipated frequently asked questions that we think parents will have. On these next few slides, I'm going to kind of talk about some of those questions, or at least some of the answers to those questions. So here are the most important things I want parents to know when they receive these reports. First of all, the PARCC test replaced the old state test, and that it only measures math and English language arts instruction aligned to Common Core. I think that's a common misconception out there that PARCC and Common Core deal with lots of other stuff, so I want to make sure parents are clear that it's just math and ELA. The fact that they're only one of several measures, that PARCC is not the be-all and end-all about your student. It's a snapshot of what they know and can do, and we have lots of other information from classroom assessments and district assessments that give us the whole picture of your child. I do want parents to recognize that the way the score reports are structured, they're really useful tools for both parents and teachers. They shouldn't surprise teachers, I don't think, because I expect that they'll just validate things we already know about our students and maybe give us kind of an outside perspective on things that I guess we're wondering about. And from a parent perspective, again, it's just one more piece of information about where your student is strong and areas your student still needs to kind of focus on. I think a big piece for parents is to know that this test has moved away from multiple choice questions, that it's really critical skills and problem solving. And that focus is probably going to result in your child's score looking a little lower than it typically has. And quite honestly, it's going to look a little lower because this is a new test. We've been shifting to these standards for a short amount of time. The instructional materials available to us are not plentiful. And so, I think this is typical of a first year of an assessment. I can remember when we first gave our state test, and I looked back today, our grade 3 students were 38% proficient in the first year of our old state test. And by the time we finished giving it, they were 80% proficient. Part of that was certainly good instructional practice. Part of it was getting used to this new test and these new standards. So I want to remind parents of that it's the first year, it's a baseline, and it's a place that we can grow from. And I think I'm going to turn it back to Callie so she can talk about resources for educators.
Great. Thank you so much, Audra, and thank you so much, Phyllis. I've had the pleasure of working with both of them for quite a long time, and so it's great always to be on a webinar with such amazing folks. So here you'll see the resources for educators page, and this is something that's on the parcconline.org website. And we simply post a lot of different tools and tutorials for educators. There are score report resources. There are different, as I like to think of, the backbone resources, so easy access to things like the evidence statements, the performance level descriptors, collaborative videos that we did with the teaching channel, and more. So highly encourage you to go to those and find some PARCC resources. You'll probably note that you've seen some of them before, and then others might be kind of translations that you can use in your classroom of your fellow folks in your PLCs. The next thing I want to show you is a lot of what we were just talking about as Audra was going through the score report. PARCC has recently launched something called understandthescore.org. We realized that there's not as much real estate on just a front and back piece of paper when they are going home to parents. So if you noticed as Audra was going through those slides, you may have seen, for more information about how your child is doing, what you can do with your child, please visit understandthescore.org. This site is live right now and a really great resource for parents to use. And we got a question on the principals webinar, I think on Tuesday, was all the resources that you're showing, are they only for parents or can we use them as teachers, as principals? And absolutely, these are really meant to be great resources for everyone to really fuel those conversations about how best to help students succeed. The value of the score reports is that they are actionable, and so they should help parents really look and see how to help their child at home. This site helps parents answer specific questions about the score report and also includes links to interactive partner resources like Great Kids from Great Schools, Be a Learning Hero, Skill Builder, and I'm going to show you screenshots of those. You may also see up at the top of the screen where it says under Help Your Child about the test, it also says your state. And so if you are in Rhode Island, if you're in New Jersey, this is a very quick way to access content that your state education agency has developed. So think of this as just another way to get to the information that you need for your state. The next slide you'll see is the Great Kids State Test Guide for Parents that we just mentioned. So you will be able to access this from understandthescore.org. But the Great Kids site by Great Schools is another great resource. I think I just said great 3 times there. And so you may be familiar with Great Schools and all of the work that they've done, really providing parents with information about the schools in their neighborhoods, in their districts, in their states. And here parents can find parent-friendly explanations of the skills and content in each of those categories and those subclaim categories that Audra showed you. It contains videos and sample problems to show parents where their child should be and how they should be able to help them out in each claim, and helps describe the skills a child needs to master to meet the expectations in each area. So again, just giving parents more information about what they can do so they can start those conversations with you, teachers, in the classroom when they come in with that score report. The next guide you'll see is something called Skill Builder, and this is another great resource. Again, not just a great resource for parents, but for teachers as well. Skill Builder is on the bealearninghero.org website, and you'll notice that beyond Skill Builder, if you go to bealearninghero.org, they have a ton of communications resources, a lot of things from the National PTA and other really trusted partners. So highly encourage you to go there, pull things out, modify them, just really great stuff that's online. This includes a search engine with academic resources aligned to the PARCC subcategories in both subjects. So notice this actually shows our partners from Smarter Balanced in some of the other consortium states, but it will be updated to include the PARCC states, or has been. Parents can use their child's score report to locate specific resources tailored to the test category where he or she needs improvement. So you'll see there that it says state, grades, subject, test area, get results. And there are a lot of really great resources. I will say that they're quite dynamic. They're very colorful as well. So things that parents can really use or families can use with their kids at home. The resources are also labeled as below, at, or near, and above expectations so that they can truly meet kids where they are. So again, providing that alignment between what parents see when that score report goes home, what you all will see as educators on those score reports, and then these actual resources. Next, I want to mention, before we move on to questions, is something really great, which is what we always get. Well, beyond the summative test, beyond the end of the year test, you'll see there in that orange slice of the pie, what else is coming from the PARCC Consortium? Well, educators, state educators at your state education agencies have been collaborating and working hard with local educators, with staff here, to create some really amazing resources that are useful for educators in the classroom when we're talking about how it is that we get to that end of the year point. So over the course of the next few months and currently available, I'm going to talk about some resources here. So first of all, something that's already online, I'm sure you've seen it many times, are those practice tests. And those just really give you a great idea of what kind of items are on the test, the interactivity. We heard a lot from teachers over the past year and a half, that this is what they used when they were showing kids how they may want to go through the items, how to toggle back and forth. So thinking about it, you can think about it from a content perspective, but also just thinking about it from how do kids move through a computer-based test, especially if they're not as familiar with that. The practice test is available in grades 3 through 11. It also includes those accommodated forms, Braille, large print, and they also all include answer keys as well as a quick tutorial to get you started. So again, really great resources if you're just trying to refresh about what you did experience and maybe in the field test or even in the spring administration this year. Next, you'll see another set of resources that are available, which are really neat, those K-2 formative tasks. I'm a former middle school teacher, not a former early childhood educator, but I will say that these are pretty neat. And these were developed with classroom educators saying, what is it that you need to see in order to see how students are doing, whether or not they're meeting those skills, where they may need improvement. So these K-2 formative tasks are now available online. The idea is for them to provide educators with instructionally useful information related to how students demonstrate knowledge, and they can provide the appropriate level of information back to teachers about how to help those students. These tasks gather, not test, tasks is very important here, gather information in a way that is invisible to students. So something that early childhood educators are very familiar with, things like games and activities to gather that information, and should just be a part of their daily learning. I will note that all of the resources I'm showing you here are absolutely optional, so they're not required. They're all really meant to help you with your instructional practice, with what you're doing with your PLCs, how you're thinking about your whole school learning. Next, you'll see these speaking and listening formative tools. These include videos and rubrics and are meant to get at those Common Core state standards that are measuring the speaking and listening skills. We heard over and over again that the speaking and listening skills or those standards were some of the most exciting parts of the Common Core for many educators. And then also another chance for teachers to really collaborate across the content areas. So when you look at the speaking and listening tools, really think about, okay, is this something we can just do in the English language arts classroom, but is this something that we can collaborate with our science educators, with our math educators, and so on and so forth. And again, they're intended to help educators measure and better understand how students are grasping those speaking and listening skills. And they are available for grades K through 12. Next, you'll see something that I think everyone is getting quite excited about, which are those released items. The released items are really important because they give us an idea of what was on the test and provide a lot of avenues for teachers to really grapple with those, understand how students did. This year, PARCC will release one form's worth of items in both ELA and math for each grade, 3 through high school. The first release will be at the end of October and will include items, annotations, model student work at each performance level, and scoring rubrics. They'll first be available in PDF format, and then the technology-enhanced items will come a little bit later this winter. So again, this is a great resource to help teachers as you develop formative assessments in your classroom, learn more about the types of items that are on the test, and just get a better sense of what each performance level looks like. We've gotten over and over again, please share model student work, tell us or give us a better idea of what it might look like, especially on those longer form, the performance-based assessment tasks where they're measuring multiple standards, what that might look at the different levels, especially since the content is more rigorous and it's expecting a lot more of students and teachers as you all shift your instructional practice. So highly encourage you to log in and look at those when they are released at the end of October. I'm sure there will be a big splash about that. Next, you'll see this little piece that's rounding out the pie, which is the Partnership Resource Center. So the Partnership Resource Center is intended to be a trusted online location for educators and administrators to find critical information about the PARCC assessment design and implementation. Here, educators can get useful professional resources built by PARCC, by the states and other partners. The PRC includes access to the K-2 formative tasks, speaking and listening tools, technology readiness tools, release items and associated materials, professional development modules, of which I will note there are now 5, PARCC 101, accessibility, K-2, speaking and listening, and diagnostic. So those of you that were waiting for those additional free modules, they are up and running and on the PRC. And they'll also include, or this will also include both user-developed and PARCC-developed content. So I really encourage you to dig into the PRC. It's a great digital library, broken up really, I think it's quite intuitive. I may be biased, but very, very easy to navigate and easy to create an account, log in, start looking, and figuring out how you want to use some of these tools in your classrooms, in your districts, in your states. And then lastly, you'll see that the diagnostic tools are coming. I know that this is something that gets a lot of people clapping when we're out in the field. So the diagnostic tools are launching later this fall and include a range of subtests in both ELA or in reading and math that pinpoint students' learning strengths and needs. These reading subtests include decoding, fluency, vocabulary, comprehension, and very exciting for me as a former reading teacher, a reader motivation survey to help you better tailor what kids might want to do, what they might want to read in the classroom. And the mathematics subtests include comprehension and fluency. I will note that for the fluency, those are for grades 2 through 6, because as we know, those fluency standards are built into grades 2 through 6, not necessarily 7 through 8, but available for you all to use in the field. And then a writing diagnostic tool will be available in 2016. The diagnostics are intended to provide teachers results to help you design instructional plans and track student progress, and they're available on the whole for grades 2 through 8. So again, really, really exciting. It's kind of a soft launch this year as educators are filling out, looking at it. So if you're interested in those diagnostic tools, highly encourage you to talk to your district, highly encourage you to talk to your state education agency to indicate your interest. And also, this is a great opportunity to provide feedback on things that are coming to the field right now and see how you like them. So with that, I think I am going to go ahead and open things up for questions. We have two amazing experts here today, figuring out how to pop out my questions bubble here. But Audra and Phyllis, are you still on the line?
We are.
Still here.
Great. All right. So Phyllis, I think I'm going to go ahead and ask you for your perspective on this. So how is the change in testing going to impact those of us giving the fall 2015 assessment that have both performance-based end of year when comparing the results between the fall and spring administration? So I think that's a little bit about some of the design changes.
I'm sorry, I missed part of that. So are they asking from going from last year's test to this year's test?
Last year's test is this year's test, and also I know that the design doesn't fully change until spring administration, so making sure that there aren't going to be too many differences there.
Yeah, and so the states worked very closely with our TAC, that's what we call them, it's our Technical Advisory Committee, as we made those changes. And one of our guiding principles was to make sure that as we move forward with the design changes, is that we could still hold true to the performance level setting we had, and that we could look at the results from the fall or this spring's administration that would change our test so much that it would impact our ability to make those comparisons from this past year's results to this year's. So we were really careful about that and made sure that we got input from our experts to make sure we didn't make too many changes.
Great. And I want to remind everyone, thank you so much, Phyllis. I want to remind everyone that you can enter your questions into the chat box. So I want to remind you that we are now collecting all of those questions, so don't be shy. We have quite a bit of time to take any questions. So another thing that I actually want to ask, I'll ask you, Phyllis, again. So next year, will folks get the scores earlier so that the reports can help them tailor instruction? And how will those results, or how will the results, and I think this is over to you, Audra, how will the results this year help you?
I'll just let you know that, yes, next year results will come back much quicker. As you all know, we had to do performance level setting this year, which was in July and August. So our goal is to get them back much sooner. And depending on when states are finishing their testing, because we know that our friends in New Mexico and such start testing earlier than often our friends.
Phyllis, I think your audio went out. Audra, are you still there?
I'm still here. Yeah, I'm glad you said that. I thought it was me, and that's why I couldn't hear. One of the things that you mentioned is, sure, so we're getting information obviously rather late in this first round because we had to do all the setting of the performance levels and the standard setting over the summer. But I think, from my perspective, getting information on how my students performed last year will be particularly helpful in the reasoning and modeling areas and mathematics, just because those strands travel throughout the grade levels, and it will help me to know, regardless of the content, that's an area that either a student has strength in or a particular place where I can provide some additional focus. I think obviously that as we get results sooner through this process, that's going to help even more. It's going to help in terms of maybe adjusting some things at the end of the year for students. It's going to help in terms of planning. We'll often group students for particular ramp-ups or enrichment opportunities in our district, and I think having that data earlier will help with scheduling for the following year. So I can see us using it in a variety of ways.
Thanks, Audra. And Phyllis, do we have you back by any chance?
I didn't know I left. Can you hear me?
Yeah, it was cutting out a little bit. Well, good. I'm glad that you're back because I have a question for you. So the question is, will student reports eventually track progress from grade to grade? So I guess that what they're asking here is about growth or how PARCC states are approaching that.
Yeah, so we are going to be calculating growth obviously we couldn't do it this year, but next year there will be a growth score that is calculated for each student. So they'll be able to look at the progress they've made in comparison to peers who perform similarly as they did in the previous year. So we will be tracking year-to-year growth for students.
And then
that will appear that will appear on their reports in future years.
Great. And then I have a quick follow-up question about comparison as well. So are we going to be able to see as teachers comparisons of students from district to district, from school to school?
So will teachers be able to see performance of other schools? Is that your question? I'm trying to clarify the question. And I think this will vary in terms of how states report their information. So in Rhode Island, we on our website report the performance of every school. So a teacher could log on and look at the performance of every school in Rhode Island, obviously at an aggregate level. And certainly someone from New Jersey could look at our schools if they had an interest and says, you know what, there's a school that's a similar size and similar population that I want to look at. So that certainly will be available. And I do know that every state publicly reports all of their results in some way, so they'll be able to make that comparison.
That's great. And so, and Phyllis, so that means that kind of every state that will be approaching that a little bit differently, at least reporting out the growth as well.
Exactly.
Perfect. Making sure that we scroll through all these, you all are asking a lot of great questions, so we want to make sure that we have everything here. And so another question that just came through is, in spring 2016, are they administering both the performance-based and the end of year, or only one test in spring 2016? So I know that can be a little bit confusing with the collapse of the window.
Yeah, so it essentially compresses both of those, although we did remove some content as well. So it's close to just combining the PDA and end of year into one window, but we did remove some of the items and passage, and that's why they're also a little bit shorter than just combining the two. But it's one assessment. You will not have a PDA and then a separate end of year. It'll be one assessment.
Great. And Audra, I'm going to ask you a question here too. So one question that came in is, how are current performance level expectations fare to special education populations or students who are significantly below grade levels? So how is it that you're addressing students that aren't quite meeting expectations or maybe far below expectations in your classroom?
That's a really good question. I feel like one of the tools that's useful to me that PARCC has kind of put out are those performance level descriptors, because those not only do they let me know, what someone would have to do to meet standard or what someone would have to do to exceed, they also really look at the levels 1, 2, and 3, so students who aren't meeting expectations, partially, and approaching. And what's great about those is that as you move from one level to another, there are the changes or the little mini steps up from one level to another are highlighted. So I can often find all of my special education students somewhere in that chart and identify, okay, this student is a level 1. And so for me, to get them all the way to a level 4 is probably not reasonable, but what are the things I can do to get them to a level 2? And let me just focus on those small steps right now to see if we can get them to grow a level. So I would say that those are useful, really useful documents. And I'll also say that throughout the standard setting process this summer, myself and many of the educators who were there made some suggestions around those performance level descriptors, so much so and I'm pleased that PARCC is actually going to make some minor revisions to them based upon our suggestions, and they've pulled together a bunch of us and some other educators to help them do that. So I think they're a good tool now, and I think they're going to be even better to help with those students and for me to kind of find out where they are and how to move them to the next place.
Thanks, Audra.
And Audra, just to add to that, by the way, those performance level setting panels not only included the math and ELA experts like Audra, but they also included teachers and educators with expertise in special education and expertise with English language learners to make sure that we were thinking of all kids as we were setting these performance level descriptors. I think that was an important piece to remind folks.
Thank you for adding that, Phyllis. You're right. I was in a room of 16 educators, and 2 of them were special educators.
That's fantastic. And I think what's important to note is that process that Phyllis and Audra are describing is also mirrored in the item development, item review process. So what's probably not always talked about is the multiple checkpoints, the 30 sets of eyes that really are on and approve those items before they even get to the field test part. And so if you're interested in that process, highly encourage you to go to that educator resources page. You can download the one-pager, you can share it out, and you'll see when those bias and sensitivity reviews happen, when the content reviews happen. And so there's a lot that happens that has to get through folks like Phyllis, like Audra, and all of their colleagues to even make it to the very end. So Phyllis, I have another question here, which is, will the diagnostic test be free to districts, since currently many schools give quarterly benchmarks?
So this year, as it is a soft launch, it is going to be available to PARCC state educators. And I think as it grows and we need to continue to develop it, there will be a charge for that. And I think that will be worked out differently. Some states may purchase it as a state, others it might be district by district or school by school.
Thanks so much. And again, if you're interested in those diagnostic tools, though, and really using them and being able to give feedback on them, this is an exciting year to be able to do that, like Phyllis just said, for free. And so please, please, please contact your state education agency to indicate interest so we can get you on that list. So the other question that I have here is, I have a lot of questions here, and I'm happy to answer one of these because I was just sharing some of the numbers earlier before we got on this webinar. So one question that was asked was about the college and career ready piece. So will this test soon be used as colleges to decide acceptance? Acceptance, no, but placement, yes. We actually have over 50 institutions of higher education in the PARCC states that have already committed to using those scores at level 4 and 5 for placement directly into first-year credit-bearing courses without need for remediation. And if that's something that you want to see happen in your state, encourage you to go to your institutions of higher education and say, this is really about incentive for students to do well. It's about student success. And encourage them to put this as one of the tools in their toolkit alongside ACT, SAT, Compass, and AccuPlacer, homegrown assessments, whatever else they're using. And so to follow up on that, yes, colleges are aware of this, but we highly encourage educators in the field, teachers in the classroom, to talk about it as well and talk about how this is one of the benefits overall of the PARCC assessment system. Again, just making sure that I can get through all of this. So I think another question that has been coming up a couple of times are, Phyllis and Audra, are there any go-to resources that you recommend to use as teachers, teacher leaders with their colleagues in this time of transition? Are there any great resources, communications materials, things that you've seen states put out, districts put out? I think more information is always better, but would love if you could share some of your favorites.
So I think in terms of content and supporting, there's lots of resources out there, but in supporting instruction, I think that, as Audra mentioned, the PLDs and the evidence statements that are what we use to develop test items from are really good tools to help understand the content that we're trying to measure and help you think about how it might support instruction. I think the one big resource that will be hugely helpful that will be out in a couple of months, actually some of the PDFs will be out later this month because we now are in October, are the released items and the sample student work that will go with that. I think especially for the ELA performance test, it'll be really helpful to see student work. And I know many of you probably have been looking at the rubrics already that PARCC has and PARCC uses, but now you'll be able to really look at it with student work and help you think about how you might be helping students to move and improve their writing based on that rubric by looking at some samples.
Yeah, and I would just really want to agree with Phyllis and build on what she said. I think that I can't wait till the released items come out with the student work, but in the meantime, those evidence tables and performance level descriptors are such rich, incredibly useful documents, and I feel like I know with my old state assessment that none of that was there. I never got to hold in my hand the document that the test creators and the people who were reviewing the items got to hold in their hand. I never knew what that looked like, and I never got to hold in my hand kind of how they were going to decide where students fell. And so I think I appreciate the transparency of that, and I've worked really hard to, part of my role as a math coach is to run professional development for teachers. And actually, through the Rhode Island Federation of Teachers, we do tons of professional development to help people teachers are asking for, how do I get students ready for PARCC? And just digging into those tools together, thinking about how they can help you to kind of revise your district level assessments so you're asking the right questions, which will then drive your instruction, using those performance level descriptors to think about how you report information to parents at the district level. Those tools are huge, and I've worked to develop some protocols that I think have helped teachers. They're busy documents, so you need time to sit together and get through them, but it's time well spent, and yeah, there's nothing else out there like that I think is going to help you be able to focus on the standards, and if that's the case, then your students will be able to show what they know on the assessment.
Yeah, and I want to just remind folks, as we keep referencing PARCC assessment resources, that because this assessment is so tightly aligned to the Common Core, that using those resources is really helping you teach our standards. I don't want you to think that we're encouraging teaching to the test. We really want you to teach to the standards, which our assessment is aligned to, and that will help kids do well on the test. Everything goes back to the standards. That's where we started, and we built those evidence statements and performance level descriptors too. So everything is in tight alignment with the standards that you're all teaching to.
Thanks so much to both of you. And we still have really good questions rolling in. So Phyllis, I'm first going to ask you this question, and then Audra, I have a question for you. So how do we explain to parents of special education students the way very complex, moderately complex, and readily accessible items are included in the test sessions? Many parents are concerned that items focus on very complex, driving down the information provided. And students were reporting that so much was far from readily accessible to them. How can we address this? So I think it's really about communications and understanding the standards and how the items are sequenced. So would you like to answer that?
Sure, I can speak a little bit to that, and I'm sure Audra could probably add to it too. So I think there's a couple of things about the items and their accessibility. One is thinking about the accessibility features and accommodations themselves and how they can help access, how that they themselves can help students access the items. So, for example, for a struggling reader, the reading test, math test, can be read to any student, right? Because we wouldn't want a student's ability to read the text get in the way of them demonstrating their math ability. But the other aspect of that, too, is that the way the items are written, it allows kids to show what they know. So many of our items are multi-part items. So the first item might ask an easier skill, perhaps a more direct question in mathematics. And then the second part asks them to explain their answer and might be a little bit, and might ask them to take it to a next level of difficulty, right, or more complexity. So for a struggling student, certainly that entry part of the item helps give them access, and a little bit helps scaffold their understanding and their learning to help support that second part of the question.
Thanks, Phyllis. That was great. I was actually noting that these are great questions, and they're not easy questions, but we appreciate all the thought that's going in on this webinar. So, Audra, there's another question that came up that said, within mathematics, the students are taking the PARCC in different content areas each year, so at the different grade levels. How can you expect to move from level 1 to level 2 if they're being assessed in different contents? So I think this is really talking about the progression of the standards and how you're going to address that. And I think as a pre-K through 12 coach, you'd be a great person to talk about it.
I'm afraid I'm worried that I'm not going to answer it, though, because I'm worried that I don't understand the question. Could you repeat it, Callie? I'm sorry.
Sure. So I think, Audra, the question is, the standards are, although there are similarities in the content areas, though they do change from year to year. So how is it that teachers can best address, say, if they're teaching 7th grade and then 8th grade, how is it that they can help move students along and help with that growth from, say, a level 1 to a level 2?
Okay, thanks. So that's helpful. So I think, part of the way the standards are constructed is helpful in this regard. So, the standards are organized around domains, and most of the domains stretch across several grade levels. I'll take fractions, for example. So the fraction domain essentially starts in 3rd grade and ends in 5th grade. Not that students aren't applying fractions later, but it switches over to the number system domain. So within the fraction domain, there are lots of things that are common across those grade levels. What changes sometimes is the level of complexity with those things. So, in 3rd grade, we might be dealing with equivalent fractions in a certain way. In 4th grade, we deal with them in a bit more sophisticated way, and so on. So, if I was to get a score report at the end of grade 3 and a student was, I don't know, a level 1 in the equivalent, in the fraction area, fortunately for me, if I'm working with them in 4th grade the following year, equivalent fractions are still a big piece. And so I could look at the performance level descriptors for 3rd grade to decide how to bridge between where they were in 3rd grade to where the expectations are in 4th grade. So I think in places where we have these nice domains and students have maybe 2 or 3 years to kind of master and take hold of a concept, we're in better shape. I mean, obviously, when we switch over completely and in 6th grade we start ratio and proportion, we're kind of starting anew again. I will say, and this was something that they said it was okay to talk about, when we were doing our performance setting, we did notice that when students jumped, when we had those jumps to a new grade level with a new domain, it was almost like a fresh start. And we saw lots of kids doing well because the domain was new and it wasn't relying upon kind of all of those gaps that they may have developed. I mean, it certainly touched on some of those standards, but it was new stuff. And so students were able to kind of start fresh. So I'd say within a domain, it's not easy, but it's doable because it builds. And when we saw the switch to a new domain, students did better.
And just to give a plug for the diagnostic assessments, actually, the math assessments that are built, and I think will continue to grow, the way they were designed was to look at learning progressions across grades. So really being able to, for example, dive deep into that fractions area to see where a student is struggling and be able to build from there. So where you might see a student struggling, you can just focus in on that area of difficulty to better understand where they are and focus instruction. So those are some great tools that will help for struggling students in that way.
Thanks to both of you. And Phyllis, I always think about the math assessment or the math diagnostics because you can focus in on a single standard, a cluster, the progression that you just talked about as like a choose your own adventure diagnostic, which is really exciting when you're an educator and you're thinking about whether or not you have 10 minutes in a classroom and you want to look across 10 different kids. So really, really great resource. And there was a question there about the diagnostic assessments and the results. If you do choose to use the diagnostic assessments this year, they are online. And so those results you would be getting back would be immediate as well. And so when the kids go through, we've done a few demonstrations of those, they would get their results at the end. So you could actually use that data immediately. It's not like the end of year test where we have to wait and go through a different process to answer that. There's one more question here, a couple of questions about policies in general, and I want to reiterate that, both Audra and Phyllis are from Rhode Island and spoke a little bit to the Rhode Island experience. We had Barry and Emil from New Jersey on Tuesday and spoke to the New Jersey experience. With respect to things like about different policies regarding high school graduation and other things like that, those are really state and local decisions. And so if you have questions about those, highly encourage you again to contact your state education agency. PARCC Consortium states have a lot of common policies really regarding test administration. But those larger policy questions are really things that you should focus in on within your state. We're actually at the end of time, and I know that there are questions that are still rolling in, and so we'll try to figure out how to answer some of these, but appreciate it. And so, Phyllis, I don't know if you want to go ahead and give the closing remarks, and then we can say thank you to everyone.
Sure, great. Well, before we all sign off, I want to encourage you to download the PARCC Guide to Teacher Conversations around the score reports. And we hope that you'll download this. If you look at your control panel, you'll see a little tab that says handouts. And then underneath, if you open that up, it says PARCC Guide for Teacher Conversations, and you can just click on it and download it. This guide was developed in partnership with Be a Learning Hero, who conducted several focus groups with parents. And this is really great because then we really get feedback from parents on what is helpful to them. And so the guide includes questions parents are asking about the score report, along with the responses that they thought were most effective from educators. So we hope that this will be really useful in your conversation with parents because, I know you all know this, but just as a reminder, we know that the parents trust you. They're educators. You are closest to their students and their children, and they trust you most, so we know they're going to be going to you for information. So we want to make sure that you're as well prepared to answer these questions as you can be. So we hope that you'll download this and be able to make use of it with your students and families.
Wonderful. So thanks again so much to Phyllis and Audra. We were saying we could have gone on for another hour, and so hopefully this is impetus for us to do another one. So again, look out for the recording of this presentation. We'll be up on the PARCC website. We're sure states and districts will be sending it out as well. Please follow us on Twitter at ParcCplace, which I'm sure folks are getting information from. And be on the lookout for those score reports and the item release. A lot of exciting things to come. So thanks, everyone, and have a wonderful evening.